Today, Les and I wanted to do another dual review. This time it is on The Wonder by Emma Donoghue. Many of you may recognize Emma Donoghue's name. She wrote Room, which was a wildly popular book from a few years ago that got made into an Oscar-nominated movie. This book came out after Room, and it has a pretty different storyline. This one follows an English nurse named Lib who trained under Florence Nightingale during the Crimean War. Now the war is over. Lib is back in England and she has decided to accept a job where she'll be going to Ireland to watch over this young girl who has apparently been living without food for the last 4 months. There's a committee in this town that has hired Lib and another nurse, Sister Michael, who is a nun, to come and observe the young girl whose name is Anna to figure out if she is actually surviving without food, because if that is the case, that's a huge miracle. And Ireland is very religious at this time, so if they can make some money, get some tourism off of this amazing thing that is happening, they want to do so. But first, they have to make sure that it's legitimate. Lib is somebody of science. She is convinced that Anna is not actually staying alive without food, that she's somehow being secretly fed or she's secretly stealing food. So when Lib gets there and she sees what's going on and realizes this situation might be more than she can handle, that there's some layers to this and something's going on, she really has to figure out like what side of this she wants to be on. Is she just going to be a nurse who is observing, or is she going to try and do what's right for Anna? When The Wonder came out, I feel like there were a lot of high expectations because Room was so popular and was so good, and I agree, I loved Room a lot. So when I picked up The Wonder and then reviews started coming out and they were sort of mixed, some people really liked it and some people were kind of ho-hum about it, I definitely lowered my expectations for it. However, I'm happy to say that now that I have read it, it definitely exceeded those expectations that I had. I definitely liked it a bit more than Les did. I gave it 4 stars. And part of that is because of the different characters that Emma Donoghue has. There are a number of really fantastic characters that you want to love, and then there are a number of characters that you love to hate. Lib being the main character, you spend the entire book following her perspective, so you get to know Lib and Anna the most. There are some secondary characters. I already mentioned Sister Michael. There's also a journalist named William Byrne who is there for the Irish Times, I believe, who's trying to report on what's happening, but he's having a little trouble getting the information that he wants because when Lib gets there, she comes in kind of like a bulldozer and starts making rules about what can and can't happen in an attempt to sort of figure out what's going on. I really liked Lib because she's a flawed character. When she arrives in Ireland, she's very judgmental of everything about it, the weather, the people, their customs. She jumps to conclusions and she makes a lot of assumptions that she shouldn't have. And the beginning of the book, she's very negative. She would not be the kind of person that you would want to spend time with, but she believes she's there for a job and she wants to prove what she thinks is happening is actually happening. And once the situation becomes more complicated, Lib starts to realize that she's gonna have to sort of change her viewpoints, what she originally thought. And she apologizes for things that she did, and she grows as a character. So the Lib that you see at the beginning of this book versus the one that you end with, she's come a long way, and I really enjoyed being a part of that journey. Anna, who is the character that we definitely spend the second most amount of time with because that's who Lib is watching over, she was an interesting character in the sense that I didn't quite know what to make of her all the time. She seemed very mature, but she was also so religious and so centered around her family that it was hard to know how much of what she said was her just regurgitating what her family had told her versus what she actually believed. And then in terms of characters that you love to hate, there's some male doctors who are incredibly sexist and just beat down anything Lib has to say. And then Anna's family, her parents and then her cousin Kitty, who's living in their house as a maid, they want to do what's right for Anna, but they are so engrossed in their religion that, at least from my perspective, it was hard to know how how much they were actually seeing versus what they wanted to believe. Another thing that I really liked about this story, besides the characters, was also that underlying current of what is actually happening. There was always a little bit of tension there, and you never quite knew what was going on. And so to finally figure out what was happening as the book progressed was really satisfying, but it always pulled me back in because I wanted to know, like, something's definitely not right here. What's going on? And that also lends to the atmosphere that this book has. It's 1850s Ireland. They're still recovering from the potato famine, and the weather is very moody. So although this book does technically take place in the summertime, it feels like a fall read just because the atmosphere is very dark, very wet, kind of gloomy. So I would definitely recommend picking up this book in the fall. There weren't too many things about the book that I didn't like. There were some slow points, and that was a big complaint that a lot of people had. It was that the story felt sort of slow at times, and that's true, but it's also the nature of the story. You are following a nurse who is watching a child. There's not a ton of stuff going on, but there is still that undercurrent of what is going on, but there's not a lot of crazy action or anything like that. It is a lot of Lib in Anna's room, talking with her, talking about religion, figuring out things together. And another point that was a little hard for me was the amount of religion in this book. There's a lot of it. I didn't grow up in a religious household, so all of this was new to me. Lib's the same way, so I was seeing it from Lib's perspective, not somebody who grew up in a religious household. And then this village is so religious, and there were a lot of prayers and things that were talked about actually written out on the page, and I understand it was part of the story. I certainly don't think it took away anything for me, but it didn't really add to it either. I don't think this book would be for everyone because it is a little bit slower, but if you're looking for a really atmospheric historical fiction read, I would certainly recommend this book. Now that I've read The Wonder, I really think I should probably pick up Frog Music because that's twice now that I've really enjoyed books by Emma Donoghue. I'm now going to pass the review on to Les. She'll share what she thought about the book, and she'll also touch on a couple different topics that I didn't. So over to her.
Hey, what's up, hello? So I think the first and most notable difference is that Bex has a really beautiful edition of this book, and I have what I think is probably the most recognizable cover if you search for this on the internet. The spoon on the front actually becomes a interesting plot point as the book progresses. So I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. I'm trying to really stick to the little phrases that they use with all of their stars, and I think 3 just means I liked it. And you know what? I did like this. The plot was interesting. It kept me engaged. It was dark but not ominous, and I could really easily imagine this rainy Dreek, to use a Scottish word for the Irish, Ireland, where all of this took place, just sort of a dark, somber, serious setting. I think the inside flap says that this is a haunting and dark book, and I didn't find it particularly haunting, despite the fact that the subject matter certainly was not exciting and uplifting, but I don't think that it was, haunting and terrifying in the way that I've seen it described. For me, I really enjoyed these characters. Our main character, Lib, was likable enough. She was not failure-proof, which I really appreciated. There are several points through this book where she says, well, I made a complete mess of that, or I completely botched that conversation. So she's very aware of her failures, which I think is important, especially for someone with her background having been so well-trained by such a famous person, that I think it's sort of perhaps easy to write a character that falls into the trap of thinking that they're perfect, and she definitely does not, which I really appreciated. And she's very no-nonsense about her job, so I think that she was just sort of the right characterization to take on a role like this. So Anna, I found so interesting. It was really intriguing to see her interact with her family and how much the beliefs that her family instilled in her played such a strong role in her life. And a lot of that is due to their religion and the way that they practice it and how often they practice it, and how many facets of that just play into the things that she believes. She was such a curious child, and for someone that was only 11 years old, she showed remarkable adultness to her in all of her choices. And I just found her to be very engaging. And she was engaging in the sense that there was always something new to learn about her or focus on, to see where her character had to go to develop. And that's what really kept me engaged. Not necessarily that she did a whole lot of changing throughout the story, but she was constantly making these tiny little alterations and tiny developments, which all led back to sort of the source of her upbringing, which led to that. But I found her to be very interesting, and I thought that she and Lib's relationship was just fascinating to sort of witness as it grew. I also actually really enjoyed William Burns, though he did seem to play something of the savior in this novel, and being a journalist was not really enough of a fault, I think, for him to have. I would have liked to see him have a little more problematic nature, but he was a sort of breath of fresh air, and sort of a predictable breath of fresh air, which you needed because the rest of this is not exactly happy and uplifting. There are a lot of themes that emerge in this book. We see the dismissal of women initially in here, for sure. The very, very stark set gender roles in this time period. The fact that there is a doctor that comes in and diagnoses hysteria as a condition for what this girl is clearly not experiencing, which seemed very, very gendered to me to make that call. The dismissal of Lib's opinions as a nurse in comparison to male doctors. All of this definitely came out. And that's, of course, contextual to the time period, but I think it's very interesting and throws into sharp relief what we are seeing now to read this in this time period, and how some of those things are really still valued in some societies as the way that things should be, and how people are fighting for a little less of that in some areas. I think this book really does a sort of low and soft job at examining ethics and how far we'll go to fulfill a duty, even if that duty means that we're hurting someone else. I think that is played with a lot in this book, and there is a very clear resolution for one of the characters, but I think for others it's a little more complex, and I think they're blinded by their beliefs sometimes, or just they choose to uphold those beliefs over others that might be more practical, and some might say more valuable. And I thought that was a really interesting piece to touch on with this as well. One of the places that came through mainly for me was the heft of religion in this book. And it's obvious that religion plays a huge part in the lives of the people in this small village, and how they choose to take it up and incorporate it into their lives is so curious to Lib's character, and her with Sister Michael and Anna's parents is always, and Kitty even, are always interesting sections to read, how she will interact with them in terms of their beliefs and her lack of belief. In terms of things I wanted more of from this book, I wanted more about Lib's backstory. We get sort of her professional resume at the beginning, but then we find out a little bit more about her at the end, but it's kept from us until then, and it's her history that then becomes a plot device, which I think is a choice, but I would have liked to know a little bit more, maybe sprinkled throughout. This book didn't feel like it dragged on, despite the possibility for parts of it to be very, very tedious, just a woman, two women watching a girl suffer. It kept me interested, but it did not keep me hooked. And I think if I had known a little more about Lib and what sort of was rumbling in her B-plot, in her history, I would have enjoyed it even a little further. Goodreads reviews that I've seen call this book atmospheric, which is a lovely adjective, which I guess is a fair word to use. The atmosphere of the weather, of poverty, of religion and belief are definitely heavy in this book. There's a lot about Irish custom and Irish belief, which I would have liked to know how much of that is true. I would assume, since the author is Irish, that she sort of is able to work those ideas in there from belief, or from hearing that in her own life, or believing it herself, or something like that. But there's a lot of Irish-English battling that happens verbally in this book, and there's a lot of mistrust, and Lib says a lot of things about how sort of barbaric the Irish are, and it's very clear that the Irish do not like her because she is English, and I think those customs are interesting to talk about, and they provide like a little poke of awakeness to the fact that that's still sort of a very volatile thing to discuss even today. And I would have liked to know which of those traditions that are mentioned are rooted in fact. I don't know much about Irish culture, especially when it comes to Catholicism and Irish custom coming together. But I would have been keen to know more about that with this plot as well, if there were a place to work it in. So as always, thank you very much for watching. We're hoping to do more of these sort of partner reads in the future. If you have also read The Wonder, please do let us know in the comments down below. We'd love to chat with you about it. Everything you'd like to know about us is indeed in the description. I hope you're having lovely weeks and lovely lives, and we will both see you very soon.